So that is now gone live. So we should start seeing people come through and joining us. Good morning to everyone. I hope you are coping okay in this heat. It is delightful. So hopefully you're in an aerated environment or you've got a lot of windows and doors. So everyone should see on the screen myself, and then we have Sean, who's joining us from Italy today. So we've gone global with our webinar series for the first time, which is great. And if you hear the gentle sounds of crickets, that's Italian crickets. So, you know, we're trying to do some soothing and calming exercises for you too. And then many of you will be familiar with Catherine Miles, who is also on with us. So we'll wait a couple of minutes just while we let people trickle in to join us, and then we will launch into the slides. I know everyone is very familiar with Zoom now, as we're almost 4 months into this way of working, or maybe 5 months now. But just in terms of the technology, along the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat option. If you click that and then you select the natural default we set to all panelists, if you can change that to all panelists and attendees, that would be great. And it would be really lovely for you guys to say hello and introduce which charities you're from, so that we get a kind of feel for size of organisations and teams that we're speaking to. That would be great. And then if you leave it as all panelists, we'll be the only ones able to see it, whereas if you change it to everyone, then that will be wonderful. We will feel free throughout the session to put your questions on there. There's going to be a lot of stuff in terms of obviously developing your own style, things like that, and we'll have some questions for you throughout. So feel free to interact on the chat, and then if useful suggestions come up, we'll share the chat stream at the end of this. And that is all the Zoom technological stuff, I think. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is part of our series, which we've been running since lockdown and COVID, as a free offering to the sector to help people feel more secure and inspired during these challenging times. The recordings of all of the previous sessions are on YouTube, and I'll share links to previous and upcoming sessions at the end of this, alongside the slides and chat stream as mentioned, so that you've got those to kind of reference, because there's some really exciting stuff on there. Outside of the webinar, we're also offering training, so we'll share some more details of that at the end, and we've got things like wellness sessions and blogs to help support you. Obviously, our standard practice at Ashby Jenkins Recruitment is recruitment. So if anyone on here today has any upcoming vacancies in your team, please do get in touch with us. We are taking a really thorough approach to our assessment of candidates we're representing, so you can rest assured that you get great quality people and save yourself days of shortlisting at the moment, which people are enjoying. So for those of you that joined us bang on 11, I would have already said, we've got Sean Lincoln joining us today, who is a specialist in providing training on leadership and management and developing high performance individuals and teams. Sean is a specialist insights practitioner who's worked with many fundraising teams, supporting them to develop better working relationships, better leadership styles, and growing income, which Catherine will be able to attest to at the end. He'll be sharing some really amazing tips with us today. And as a person who likes to consider myself an amateur psychologist, I'm very excited, because this will be more stuff I can add to my arsenal. And then also we have Catherine with us. So Catherine, prior to setting up her own consultancy business, has worked as Director of Fundraising at Battersea, Breast Cancer Now, and Anthony Nolan. And over the last couple of months, she has been running her own consultancy business. She's done fantastically well in that time. A great time to set up a business in the middle of a pandemic, Catherine. That's showing your resilience, definitely.
Yeah, it was impeccable in time. He launched in the first week of lockdown, so it's been fantastic. But it's been great doing the webinars, and today will be really useful for everyone. I worked with Sean at Anthony Nolan, Breast Cancer Now, and Battersea, and we used in. I'll be sharing, particularly from Anthony Nolan, what difference it made for us as a fundraising team in practical terms, and how it helped us raise more money. So great session today, but I'm also very happy to take questions on the chat stream on how we actually use this in practice. So do post those and fire away.
Great. Okay, perfect. And I will start sharing my screen then so that we can go into that. And then we'll go from here. So this is what we're going to be covering today. So focusing on getting an understanding of your preferred working style and how you can work best with others, particularly useful at the moment for influencing upwards. Highlighting insight, profiles and coaching as techniques, which allow you to work more effectively as teams, as individuals, and then show how this is particularly useful during times of change and uncertainty. Post questions as we go throughout this. We'll come to them at the end, or we'll address them as we go through. So please don't feel like you have to save them up. And then any comments or things like that in the chat stream would be great. And we will have time for questions at the end, as I mentioned, and then save the chat stream and send it round with the slides and the recordings. But thanks for all joining us. And Catherine, you can give us a little bit more of an overview of understanding working style.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we probably all found this in our jobs. Sometimes we have colleagues that we find it really easy and comfortable to work with, and everything always goes very smoothly. And others where communication always seems clunky or difficult, or where we're slightly finding it awkward. And I guess also when we work with teams, and particularly when we manage, we see that people take on board information and particularly reach decisions in very different ways. So some people really love to chat things through. Other people really like to have information in advance and a chance to review facts and reflect before they reach decisions. And of course, as fundraisers, being able to understand our own working style and understand particularly colleagues that we're working closely with in an organisation and influence and persuade is absolutely key to our success. So we're always looking to try and get buy-in for fundraising within our organisation. We know this is always a challenging sector. It's a challenge right now during coronavirus. So we need buy-in for sign-off and investment. We need buy-in when we're trying to evolve cases for support so that they will work for our audiences, and particularly on delivery of campaigns. So when you're working with marketing teams and digital teams, press teams, with your services and operations colleagues where you need information, with your finance teams, our role we're spiders in the centre of our webs of our organisations, and we need everybody's help in order to deliver. And often those conversations can be challenging. So I found Insights profiles, both my teams and I, really invaluable as understanding our preferred working style and how we can flex it to enable us to work better with one another as fundraisers, but also particularly with our colleagues. So really excited Sean is here today. He and I have worked together now for about 10 years, 3 different charities. And I know some of the team who work with Sean are also on the chat stream today. So it's really great to have him here, and it's really valuable. And as I said, I will share how we put this into practice, Anthony Nolan, and what it did for us towards the end. So Sean, I think it's over to you.
Okay, and I'm sorry about the background in Chicago, but greetings from Italy, where I'd like to say it's actually cooler than it is in London at the moment, which is quite an achievement. So for those of you who know me already, you'll know that I'm very passionate about insights, and particularly how it ties in with coaching, either one-to-one coaching or team coaching. And for those of you who might be new to insights, I'm going to do a brief run through, and obviously if there are any questions that you've got at the end or on the chat, we will address those. So in simple terms, Insights is a psychometric tool based on Jungian psychology. It looks at 4 color energies, which are combinations of extroversion, introversion, and thinking, feeling. But it also looks at sensation, intuition. And it's great for individual performance development, particularly for those who are new to management. And I know that some of the people I've been working with as a coach, that's particularly been useful. But it's particularly useful for teams, particularly when teams are going through change, and without ruining some of the things that are happening in the sector, basically teams can be brought together. So it's really powerful when you have times of restructuring to get teams to understand each other. And as Catherine says, this is all based on preferences and perceptions. And there'll be certain people that perceive you and you perceive that once you understand from Insights what causes that, will give a much better understanding. And one of the key takeaways from this is you have increased self-awareness. For those of you who have team awareness of, this is why Catherine works in this way, this is why Ashby works in this way, this is why Sean works in this way. and it's easy to adapt. And can I be very clear? An insights profile is a snapshot where you are now. Once you're aware of that, you can adapt and change. So as Catherine says, it's really useful in charities where you're looking at getting people to work together effectively, but also not just internally, but also with stakeholders. So if I go on to the next slide. So for those of you who haven't come, is there anyone who Insights is kind of new? This is a completely new experience, maybe in the chat.
Yeah, if you've not had, yeah, great. So people are saying new to me. And is there anyone on here that's already been through some kind of Insights workshop or has an understanding? Let's see as we're going through. Okay, great.
Yeah, so it's quite, it's a mixture. So I'll go into some detail, not too much detail, but basically 1921, Jung came up with psychological types. And from that, he basically looked at extroversion and introversion, thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. Now I'm going to talk primarily in this workshop about the combination of introversion, extroversion, thinking, feeling. And in simple terms, and I'm going to relate this very much to what we've been going through lockdown. Some of you probably get your energy from workshops, webinars, meetings, and that's if you have an extroversion preference. And probably getting through the lockdown has been kind of a bit draining because you haven't had that natural interaction that charges your batteries. Whereas if you lead with an introversion preference, again, I'll be very clear, we bring both. But if you lead more with an introversion preference, probably lockdown's been great. I've been working on certain people in the sector on a coaching basis, and they're loving lockdown so much so that actually they're hesitating about returning to the workplace because they can get so much more done because it suits their preferences. Interestingly, thinking and feeling combines with those and to get the 4 color energies. And thinking and feeling is really important because if you want to understand how people make decisions to influence them, and whether that's a supporter, an internal stakeholder, or a direct line manager, someone with a thinking preference will be very task focused. So if there's a restructure and you're bringing 2 teams together, they would say the most logical thing is let's put everyone at risk and not really think too much about how that makes people feel. If you've got 2 team leaders with a feeling preference, they'd be very concerned about how people feel, and they will take a dramatically different approach. Now, obviously, it's interesting if you have team leaders who combine thinking and feeling, where that leads to. So if I lead to the next slide, and obviously interrupt me if you've got any questions, but if you look at the color energies, which is the next slide, and if you just click, actually, if you can click through so we can see the text on the 4. Brilliant, okay. Thank you very much. So fiery red energy is a combination of extroversion and thinking. So you're like, if you lead, and can I be very clear, we combine all 4 colors, but normally 2 are more dominant than the other 2. So if you bring fiery red, you like working at speed, you like working at pace, you're quite logical, quite fact-based. To-do lists are important for you, you like ticking things off, and you struggle when you can't tick things off. And you like, as I said, doing things at pace. And getting things done is a big driver for you, okay? And Catherine is saying, yeah, the cricket is definitely sunshine yellow, yeah. The reason why the cricket is definitely sunshine yellow is because sunshine yellows want to get involved in everything. In fact, the thing that pushes them into bad days is excluding them, okay? So the fact that cricket hasn't got a slot on this is pushing it into bad day behavior. But sunshine yellow energy is similar to fire red in terms of extroversion, but it's very action orientated, it's very entertaining, and will be very sociable. Now, who would you say at the moment, in the 3 of us, either myself, Ashley, and Catherine, would you say probably leads with a combination of fire red and sunshine yellow, if you had to take a guess? Yeah, I'm just seeing the chat.
Yes, you've now got some of my former team capacity, Sean. Yes, going that. Yeah, thank you, people I previously line managed, and yes, off the scale red in all sections, which I have to say, fundraising directors often are.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think it's interesting. I'd encourage you to think not just as the one color that's the lead color, but the second color. And it's interesting, Catherine, with your new profile, you actually lead with 3 colors. You bring fiery red, sunshine yellow, and cool blue. And I've seen that shift in cool blue over the last 5 years.
Do people change then throughout their careers,
actually.
or kind of under different circumstances of stress and things like that? They'll bring out more than one color, or?
Yeah, and one of the things about the profiles, and you'll see this very briefly when we run through the graphs, is the more you're aware of your preferences, the more you can adapt and change. And that self-awareness means that you can think in a team, for example. I had a team leader who had a clear lack of earth green in the team, and the team was not getting on very well because earth green is a great color to get teams to work together. And so she deliberately worked on that color, and she did that, and a year later her earth green had gone up dramatically in her profile. So you're not defined by your colors, but you need to be aware of them, and that self-awareness is critical because it impacts how people perceive you, and some people you'll find easier to work with, and some people will be more of a challenge. So if we look at the introversion part of the wheel, cool blue shares the thinking preference of fiery red, so it's going to be very task focused. But in meetings, for example, these are the sort of people, when someone asks a question, will think and hold back from saying something. But when they say it, it's very thoughtful, it's very objective, and you really need to listen to it. The risks, however, is that if you have a team where you have a lot of fiery red and sunshine energy, sometimes that cool blue voice can be missed. So there are strategies you need to put in place. And that green, which is introversion feeling, is a very reflective color, believes very much in consensus. For team leaders who lead with this will be very much getting the team on board and will take time to do that. And he's unhappy with conflict and will try and smooth conflict, and if it can't smooth conflict, will potentially withdraw. So if you've got individuals, you've got conflict and tension in the team, for the earth greens, that's quite a difficult space to be. And that's particularly important in terms of thinking about with uncertainty and change. Okay, now if we look at the translation, how it translates into color energies in terms of behavior, if I can see the next slide. Okay, well, the first thing is the graph. So as you can see there, you've got the conscious, which is some good day behavior. You've got the less conscious persona, which is more bad day behavior, and we've got the preference level, which is where we're trying to be more of a color or less of a color, and that could be conscious or less conscious. As you can see, the midpoint that goes across, in this case, sunshine yellow energy and fiery red energy are the colors that you'll see. And the person brings earth green and cool blue, but it will not be very visible. And if you look at the less conscious persona, you can see that, to be honest, cool blue, getting things right, getting attention to detail, something they will struggle on. Okay, so if you look at the next slide, who having heard what they've heard so far, would say that this is me on a good day? So if you look at fire red, quite purposeful, quite strong-willed, quite determined, quite demanding, quite competitive. And then I see Jenny there saying you come out as lime because you combine earth green and sunshine yellow, and that's a very typical color in fundraising because it's absolutely that supportive color. Who would say that actually they think that what they had so far, that they lead with fire red? They bring other colors, but they lead with fire red. And which parts, Caroline, do you think that in particular that you think resonate with you? Is it? Yeah, okay. And that's interesting because often we bring two colors. So first time I met Catherine, I could see her sunshine yellow, but then over time I noticed her fire red. And I think that's a combination of colors. So that if you want good day sunshine yellow, it's very sociable, very dynamic, very demonstrative. You can kind of tell how they're feeling, and it's very difficult to hide. If we keep on the good day slide. Yeah, and try to keep it at base sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. So if we come back to the good day slide. So on a good day.
Oh, sorry. I was just listening to the chat. I got too distracted by getting into what everyone's saying they are. Focus.
It's okay, it's okay. So if you look at the good day, if you look at the earth green, quite a relaxed part of the wheel, quite patient, quite sharing, quite encouraging, very caring. Absolutely, this is the color that, from a team perspective, is essential. Teams that do not have earth green energy in some shape or form, and the person doesn't need to lead with earth green, but needs to be above the midpoint. Teams that who are groups and not really teams, probably it's due to a lack of earth green, and that's one of the things to think about. And cool blue, very much the introverted thinking part of the wheel, very questioning, very deliberate, very precise, very cautious. And it's interesting because from a team dynamic, opposite colors, if they get each other, a very positive combination, but they can unintentionally push each other into bad days. Okay. And yes, so tell me, Jody, actually you came across this briefly, and can we hear from Jody? Ashby, is there a way we can hear from Jody?
Not verbally, no, unfortunately.
Okay. But one of the things that, if we go back to the good day slide, okay, if you lead with sunshine yellow energy and you're working with someone for the first time who's cool blue, they'll be very questioning. But it's sometimes difficult if you lead with sunshine yellow to disassociate the questioning from the task from the questioning of you. So they might make you a little bit defensive. And it's interesting, that can push you into bad day. So if we look at the bad day slide, which is the next slide.
Yeah.
Now, in particular, this is how you come across to your opposite colors. So one of the things from a team dynamic is being aware of opposites and understanding how opposites can work very well together. Because if not unintentionally, the following dynamic might happen. Someone leads with fiery red energy, it's Friday afternoon, and I was working with someone who was a team leader, and she was very much wanting things to be done on a Friday. So she would ask the people in the team to meet deadlines and be quite insistent on that. Now, to be honest, she was doing that and she was in bad day mode. The email would come across as probably not the most sophisticated email in the world, fairly direct, maybe a little bit blunt. Now, if she caught someone in a green mode who didn't feel valued by that email, that would push them into their bad day, which would make them quite stubborn. And that was interesting because then they might say, well, I am going to get it to you, but I'm not going to get it to you when you want it. And I'm not going to tell you that either. And so you can see this interesting dynamic building up. And interestingly, also from a fundraising perspective, there was another team leader who was very new to management. And she was very concerned about the length of the calls, so the time length of the calls. And she had one member of the team who led with earth green. It would take a long time on the calls. And this was a cause of disagreement amongst the two of them. It was only when she realized afterwards that the supporters really loved these calls and how much money it brought in that she had to adapt her natural preference. So opposite colors are really interesting. And interestingly with cool blue, as I said, cool blue can come across as quite indecisive, quite suspicious, potentially cold and reserved. And that can push sunshine yellow energy into becoming hasty. And the more hasty sunshine yellow energy there's, the more suspicious cool blue might become. So understanding this gives you a dynamic for working well in teams. So if we move to the next slide, as I said, the fiery red, if you lead with fiery red and a combination of colors, loss of control can be something that can push you into bad day. Exclusion can lead to sunshine yellows. Devaluing for green, not being consulted. So if you're bringing about change, if you're not consulting or you're not involving either sunshine yellow or green, you will push them into bad day and they'll resist the change. And cool blue, yeah, not feeling prepared, not feeling they got all the evidence at hand, all the information that they need, okay? So if we look at the next slide, from a team perspective, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but if you start to think about how this translates from a team perspective, you can start thinking about the dominant dynamic of a team. And you can see there's certain team dynamics, and you might want to think, what sort of team are you working with at the moment? And what sort of team leader are you leading with? And if you are going to be combining two teams, as I know quite a lot of charities are doing at the moment, you might want to think, in terms of how you would combine the different team cultures and how that would work. Okay.
Sean, just on that as
so
well.
If we move on to the next.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
just in terms of, because I guess the thing that we're talking about a lot in the section at the moment is diversity, and obviously cognitive diversity is one of those things. So
Yeah.
not just hiring teams that look like you. I suppose it's people's natural instinct is to build closer bonds with people that are very similar to themselves. So how do you kind of avoid doing that or falling in that trap?
It's a very good point. It's a very good question, because often I get asked to do profiles, not just for teams, but also when they're recruiting, and we need to be very clear that we're not recruiting to a certain color. And one of the key things about profiles being useful from a recruitment perspective is watching out for the fact that I've come across teams where the team leader always recruited to his or her color preference. And so there was no diversity in the team. And so often you might find an exec team that is dominated by fiery red with maybe a smattering of sunshine yellow. And yet the rest of the organization is cool blue and earth green. So I think understanding colors and being aware of how you're coming across and reading profiles are really important, because you tend, with the best intentions in the world, to lower rate your opposite color. And that's just an instinctive bias that we bring. So if we're aware of that bias and understanding what the team thinks, and if I take it outside the charity sector, for example, ACAS, where I did a lot of work, we profiled the entire organization. 80% of it was cool blue and earth green, which is not surprising. You think the work they do in terms of case studies, but their senior management was all fiery red and sunshine yellow. And so there was a big disconnect. And so they had to work on the diversity, and they changed the makeup of the exec team. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think, John, I've done the insights profiles with senior management teams. And again, absolutely, in charities, directors, there tends to be a dominance of red and yellow, very low green. And it's not at all big that one colour preference makes you better fitted to a leadership role, is it? In fact, actually, sometimes one of the things that I had to learn as getting my red tendencies under control is a lot of the times as a leader, those red tendencies are actively unhelpful, actually, particularly now as the team goes through, as the organisations go through big restructures and change, where you really need to be dialing into all of the colours, but particularly green. And one of the things we actually did in senior management teams I've been in, when we became aware of this and that we had very low green basically represented in our overall team energy, is we made sure that every time we were having a significant discussion about something which we were going to need to bring the teams on a journey with us, we would actually specifically make ourselves focus on these green energies and really try to tap into it. We actually had slots on the agenda which were actually, if you like, the green slot, because we knew as a senior management team we weren't going to do that naturally. And again, that wasn't because we were trying to annoy people or come across as being insensitive or uncaring or not valuing people. It just wasn't our natural stage to be really thinking in that way. And we did definitely reap the benefits in how we then communicated decisions and took on board input and made people feel more valued, because we specifically were aware this was lacking and we were taking time to really think about it.
Yeah, and picking up on that, Catherine, but picking up on Ashley's point, once you're aware of your natural preferences, and there will normally be two colors that you prefer, okay, and there will be one or two colors that are least, then the more you're aware of that, the more you can actually actively use more earth green, as Catherine had said, or use more cool blue. So, and also being aware of the makeup of your team really happens. So I was working with one charity, and they had the data part of their team, and unsurprisingly, I guess, they led with cool blue. But it was interesting because they were still having meetings where they would invite people to the meetings, not to tell them what the meeting was about, and then expected them to make a decision on the spot, which never happened. And then afterwards, they would come up to the team leader and say, "Oh, that's not going to work because of this." And they were absolutely right. And the team leader was absolutely frustrated to say, "Why didn't you say that in the meeting?" Well, they said, "I didn't realize that's what we were going to do." So by changing that, the way they approach meetings and sending out information beforehand, they tapped into that cool blue energy. So it's all about awareness. Once you're aware of the preferences in your team and yourself and the people around you, you can adapt. You're not constrained by the color energies. I think If anything, I think from a team perspective, it's about tapping into that color. And that's why the team wheel, when we do it with teams, can be interesting, because it might be no one who's dominant earth green, but quite a few people in the team can bring that color if they consciously work on bringing it. Okay, so let's look at two main applications of this, and there are lots of applications, but the first one I thought would be to think about helping teams and team leaders in particular successfully manage transition in times of uncertainty and change. And I guess it's interesting, if we were doing this a year ago, I would still be on the terrace and you'd probably still be having 36 degrees temperatures in London. But would you anticipate you'd be going through some of the situations and changes that we're going through now? So that there is a lot of uncertainty, and this is why I think being aware of how your natural style is, what happens when you're on good day, what will push you into bad day, and exactly the same for your teams is important, because in terms of times for uncertainty and change, you're much more likely to see bad day behavior. And that is something that we need to be aware of, and it impacts how you react to colleagues in your team and how they react to you. So I'm going to look at the next slide, because there's a couple of things, and we will send some follow-up information now. I'm sure most of you will have seen this before. This is the change curve, where when the change is announced, there's a loss of focus, we minimize the impact, there's anger and denial, loss of confidence. The key thing about this slide, there's two things in particular. One is you can't do anything. If you're a team leader, you can't do anything until the team get into the pit. And they all do that at different speeds, and they will do that in different ways. But it's only then that you can let go of the past and have an acceptance of new beings. And the other thing is just be aware of the futile tightrope, because as team leaders, and we'll see this in the next slide, team leaders are normally way ahead of the rest of their team because they've been briefed, they've had the information, they've gone through the change, and then somehow they think that futilely, they like to say, don't go through what we've just gone through, don't go through the loss of confidence, don't go through the anger, the blame, denial, just come across from the change into integration. Now, it's interesting, you might think, right, well, yeah, we know about the change curve, but how is that relevant to insights? How does insights help this? Well, if you look at the next slide, this is, actually, can we flip forward to the next slide, actually, after that? Yeah. Now, this is an organization in 2014. And as you can see there, predominantly, most of the team were either in the denial stage or in the pit, in the doubt stage. And they were predominantly earth greens and cool blues that were in there. And I'll explain that why in a moment, okay? Notice also, if you look at the denial stage, quite a few of the fiery reds were actively resisting change. And if you look on the acceptance side, you've got the team leaders who obviously knew beforehand and were on board with the change. But interestingly, others that were leading were sunshine yellow. And there are reasons for that, which I'll come back, okay? So interestingly, if you did this analysis for your organization, you would know exactly what strategy you need to put in place with your teams. So if we go back a slide, actually, that I'll explain a little bit more detail. So earth green and cool blue, as I said, they're going to take longer to go through the change, particularly the denial to doubt, confusion, stages 1, 2, 3 of the curve. They're more conservative in nature. They will want to keep the status quo. And they will be constantly asking this question, why do we need to change? Yeah, why do we need to do this? And so understanding the why is going to be important. And the other thing is, as they get into the acceptance stage, it's very easy for them to roll back. So as a team leader, you've got constantly talking about the impact. And earth greens will be very concerned if people are leaving the organization. That will be a major concern for them. Interestingly, the fire reds are very up for change. They're fine with change as long as they're the ones who instigate it. So put them in charge as much as they can. Give them options. And when you convince them about the situation, you need to be very confident yourself. So say, look, this is a change. This is why we're doing it. This is what I want you to do. We've got these options. Go away, think about it, come back to me, okay? As you saw in the slide beforehand, if you don't do that, then you've got problems, because they will resist the change and they'll be very, very vocal. And so if you go back, if I can just get you to flick to the slide next. Yeah, as you can see, that's the right one. You can see 5 fire reds there were actively, and that includes one of the team leaders, were actually against the change. And that was causing a lot of disarray, a lot of questions for morale. And by doing Insights Profile, they realized what was going on and they could do that. And that was a very successful intervention. Just going with Sunshine Yellows, if we just go back one slide. Again, less of a problem with change. In fact, one of the most frequent situations you'll find is they all go very much on board with change, but they will not necessarily understand the full implications of the change, or will not have read all the details. So again, you need to be constantly briefing them so they're aware of what the changes is. If not, and the other thing is they'll get so involved and excited about the change that they can maybe lose track of the other things that they should be focusing on. Okay.
Sure. We've got a couple of great questions coming up on the chat stream. So do post questions, particularly if you've got things. So Caroline was asking, when you are working with people who might be leading with an earth green preference, and therefore might find change particularly difficult. All of us find change difficult, but earth greens particularly so. How can you best communicate in a way that dials up your green energy? What's the best way to tap into green, basically, when you're communicating on change?
The best way to tap in, and the check is in the post because there's another slide in a moment that covers that. But the great thing is that the way to tap into them is in like small groups. So they get as much as they can individual attention, like one-to-ones, so they feel valued, small groups, so they feel valued. What's not going to work for them is literally booking a town hall, so to speak, and making a big flashy announcement, high tech or whatever. And as it says there, just listen. You will need to listen to what their concerns are, and their concerns will often be about other people, it will not be about themselves. So that's my immediate answer to that question. What were some of the other questions?
Yeah, so I think, so just to confirm to everyone, you'll get the recording and the slides and a further handout at the end of this, a few people asking on that. So the other things at the moment is lots of people are facing situations, Sean, where because the scale of the restructures and because of the requirements of employment around consultation, there's been that classic sequence of, there's been a mass webinar with frequently hundreds of staff on it, the chief executive the changes, everybody at home, then the line managers needing to have calls over Zoom, and of course teams with all these different color energies going on. And so this is a particularly difficult time, isn't it, to take people through news which is difficult. And of course, exactly, people are experiencing the two things. There's people who are directly affected and at risk of redundancy in an environment where there's lots of job losses and fundraising. And that, of course, is scary and traumatic. But also they're seeing cyber guilt. So they're seeing the teams or the individuals that are not affected and seeing their colleagues losing their jobs is also incredibly difficult. And of course, all of this is happening virtually via Zoom. So during these periods of big change, and particularly big sector change, what else can people do if they're having to have these conversations with the teams, or indeed if they are the staff who are on the receiving end of these consultations and redundancies?
I think it's conversation, and try and get away from the impersonal nature of Zoom. And what I mean by that is picking up the phone. I think you'd be amazed at the difference of technology, just a phone call, booking in a time, and sometimes just a spontaneous call, because particularly if we focus on Earth green energy, that's the energy that's going to struggle most with Zoom, okay? And a telephone call is going to go a long way. And don't be surprised, as you said, that you're going to get a lot of survivor guilt, and that's particularly going to apply to green energy. And can I be very clear? We combine lots of different energies, so you need to look at where that Earth green energy is showing. It will not just be those who lead with Earth green; it might be their second or their third preference. And I think interestingly,
sorry, Sean, just to add, just based on conversations I've had with teams, there's a particular problem for blues and reds at the moment in these changes. So what you might see in your organisation is people with blue because they're not getting enough information to explain the basis under which restructured decisions have been taken, and that's partly because of the time pressure and the uncertainty that the decisions at the top have been made. So they're going, well, I'm not seeing the evidence for this. And Reds, of course, are going bananas. There's a lot of Reds in leadership roles, even relatively senior, who frankly have not been involved in these decisions because the risks to the organisations are so profound. The decisions have had to be made very, very quickly at director level, which inevitably means they haven't had time to involve the levels below them. So Reds are going bananas.
Yeah, and to be honest, and I don't mean this in a critical way whatsoever, but my experience of what's happening in the sector at the moment is almost like a case study of how not to lead change from an insights perspective. Because if you don't involve the fire Reds, they're going to get involved, they're going to resist the change. If you don't give the evidence to the Code Blues, they're going to resist the change because they're saying, why do we need to change this? And it's interesting. I mean, I know that it's going to change in terms of the workplace, but one of the things that we used to be able to do is just notice how people are feeling in the office, and just taking the side for a quiet word, going into a meeting room. And it's that visible thing that I think some of the best organizations that I've seen or I've read about that dealing with change are kind of doing that. There's another question there from Ulrika. I can't see what the question is.
It says, do you have any key positives or pitfalls for green team leaders and an almost exclusively blue team during times of big change?
I wouldn't, a positive I would say is actually you've got a team that if you can sit down and give them the evidence and listen to their concerns and answer their questions and realize that's your role as a leader and be patient and calm and take on board their concerns, I think you'll be fine. I think probably if you're leading a team of fire Reds, it'd be a bit more of a challenge. But I think from a team leader with an Earth Green preference, I think you're uniquely suited to cope with the current situation, because I think you will have that instinctive desire to listen to what the concerns of the team are. I would encourage you to pick up the phone. I think Zoom was very useful at the beginning of this as a process, but I think people will find it quite a draining process now, and I think we're listing some of the things.
I will also say, and I fully understand that I work with a small team, so there's only 4 of us, but we are now coming back into the office to some level. So even if that's 1 day a week or on a rotational basis or whatever, and actually the benefits of team bonding that way, I know we've all got used to a way of communicating via Zoom, but I would strongly encourage, if you are leading your team at the moment, that you at least try and book in one time once a week to see each other in person or see half of them or whatever. I know safety has to be taken into consideration, but particularly if people are going out to pubs now and eating in restaurants, the risk, if you're comfortable doing that and you can commute safely into work, I think we need to start getting back into at least some exposure of that, just for human contacts and leadership. So that would just be my advice, seeing the benefits over the last couple of weeks from my team.
Yeah, I would endorse that, and I don't mean to try and sell what Catherine or I are doing, but increasingly when you've got new teams being formed, that you do need some sort of physical contact, with all the social distancing and whatever. But there's something about, and this is particularly true if you've got sunshiny little Earth Greens in the team, they will need to physically see each other. So yeah.
Right. Okay.
Should I move on to?
Yes. Yeah. Just in terms of time. So this one.
Actually, I'll skip that because this is a slide that gives you some tips and techniques in terms of change. So we'll send that out. And by the way, I know Ashley's going to say this anyway at the end, but if anyone has any questions that we haven't answered in this webinar, feel free to contact either Catherine, Ashley, or myself. The second thing is stakeholders, influencing stakeholders and getting buy-in. This has always been important, whether it's internal stakeholders, line managers, but external supporters. But I think with all the changes going on now, getting buy-in is absolutely critical. And the thing about profiles is it's all there. you've got 22 pages, and that gives you all the information of how to influence and how to win over people with different, and every profile is unique, so you need to read the profiles. Don't just look at the color energies. But if I look at the next slide, just a quick takeaway to be thinking about is this, and you'll find similarities in what we said about change. So if you're working with stakeholders, and these can be internal or external supporters that you need to get on board, then really get to know them, gain their trust, talk through your plan to them and reassure them at every step. And you can see the parallels there to that team leader working with a team of blues. But interestingly, if you are working and you need to get on board and get buy-in from blue stakeholders, cool blue stakeholders, then you do need solid evidence, and it needs to be backed up by all the detail you have. Okay, and let them process the information. Give them time, even if it's only literally the night before. But give them, the more evidence you give them, and the more time you can give, the better. Fiery red stakeholders, and I learned this from working with Catherine, want you to be very clear in terms of why, how, and when, and fast. So be very confident when you interact with them, if you need to get them on board, and get your facts straight as well. I won't say anything more about that, but if any of you want to know, I also worked with Catherine's PA, and he was very good at saying he could watch the people and tell the ones who were going to be successful getting Catherine on board, or who were not going to be successful getting Catherine on board. But that's something we can do maybe online sometime. Sunshine Yellow Energies, yeah. They love being inspired, they love being involved. So if you really want them to get on board with something, you really need to share your vision and be very passionate, and then that will be infectious. So therefore, the world is your oyster, because once you're on board, they're great advocates for whatever it is that you're bringing about change. Now, obviously, if you think about teams, you'll have lots of different colors there, so you'll have lots of different strategies in the same team. But that's some of the things to be thinking about buying. Catherine, is there anything you'd want to add to that? Because I know you've used it a lot at Anthony Nolan, which I know is going to be the next slide, but is there anything you want to say at this point?
Yeah, and I think, so what we try to do a lot at Anthony Nolan is, it obviously really helped if other teams had also done insights and we knew what their leading colour in energies were, where we had colleagues, particularly in fundraising and marketing, comms, or in other teams we work closely with. So we try to reflect on what we thought the person we were influencing, what their leading colour energy was, and then adapt it. So one of the things I would do with directors who I felt were probably sunshine yellow is we would start what could have been a difficult conversation actually just by having a fun chat, nothing to do with work at all, and we would essentially have a bit of a laugh together, and that would almost sort of get them into a good day mindset, and then we would try and talk about the issue, and I would try particularly to keep it focused on big picture vision. Okay, if we can sort out this glitch between our two teams, this is where we can go together. This would be so exciting and positive and energy, and that would work a lot better rather than me potentially bouncing into a fellow director very much as a fiery red of your team is blocking my team's success. This is a problem, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and this meeting is an opportunity for you to agree with me rather than actually try to get genuine consensus. So I think the more you can think about who do you need to influence, what's their leading colour, and how can you adapt what you do, particularly in the run up to that conversation, and what do you do in it, you'll have a much better chance of getting the outcome you need.
Yeah.
Should we move on to, oh sorry, just in terms of time, should we just move on to Catherine's results at Anthony Nolan? Yeah,
go for it.
Okay,
so yeah, so all fundraisers had a personal profile, and they had their one-to-one feedback session with Sean, which was great because then they could actually understand what it meant and put it into practice. Then the teams had facilitated team sessions looking at their particular dominant colour energies and how they work with other parts of fundraising. And as a fundraising leadership team, which is heads and me as director, we also had a bespoke course which focused on leadership and collaborative working and influencing internally. So particularly the heads of fundraising, which was sort of assistant director level, how could they work with their opposite numbers in operations, in finance, in comms and marketing. And that was really useful for us. And then individual fundraisers had a program of one-to-one coaching with Sean at key stages of their career. So moving up to management for the first time, taking teams through change, doing something big in terms of strategic. And Insights worked so well for us as a fundraising team, it was then used by other divisions in the organisation as well, which was really helpful. So Ashby, if you click on to the next one for the results. So it really gave us a shared understanding of how each of us worked, and it depersonalised some of those things. So if a sunshine yellow bounces up to a cold blue and suddenly pounces on them and wants a complex decision for them, often because cold blues need evidence and time to reflect to reach their view, the cold blues sometimes would just go very quiet or even get a bit grumpy or would come across as maybe being unhelpful. And also to them, of course, the sunshine yellows just look like, God, this person just comes by my desk and interrupts me and suddenly requires something really complex. So this helped us depersonalize those moments of, oh, it's just the preferred working style and the thinking style. So it enabled us to really draw on all the colour, energy, strengths when we were making decisions as a team. And actually we saw this particularly at Breast Cancer Now. I was leading the cross-organisational GDPR project. We thought we had worked out what our main GDPR approach should be, particularly about gathering consent. I was then trying to really drive that through organisationally. So I was in my red zone of, this is a huge thing for the organisation, got to get it right, complex project, off I go, bounce, bounce, bounce. When the data messenger sent me an email with an attached document going, I don't think we've got this particular nuance right. Here is my evidence, and this is what I think we should do. And initially, I had a complete red moment, which Sean will be familiar with, going, oh my God, we made this decision. What the hell? No, I'm doing it. And then I did calm down as a benefit of having worked with Sean. I go, no, hold on a minute. Firstly, I had big respect for the data guy, and I need to read this. Made myself go into a separate office, which you always have to do as a red, calm yourself down, read and reflect on the document. And of course, he was exactly right. And he'd spotted something absolutely critical where there was another route, and that other route actually, frankly, would have meant basically hundreds of thousands of pounds difference to that charity with that approach to GDPR over the years. So it was absolute crucial intervention. And that's what I mean about it's very easy as reds as yellows just to blast ahead and not give time for people who reflect. And actually often what the quiet person in the corner is saying is absolutely crucial. So you need to train yourself to be able to engage them properly at the start and listen to what they're saying. So as part of this anti-annual, we totally changed how we were running team meetings and away days and brainstorms. So we structured it so that we hit all the bases so everyone could contribute. So we sent information in advance so the cold blues could read and reflect. We looked for lots of contributions and listening and getting people sharing their thoughts to hopefully make the greens feel valued. We did lots of physical activities. So we started introducing things where they got up and moved around the room, which helped the sunshine yellows. And then we kept it very task and action orientated for the reds. And it just meant all of those meetings and training days and away days worked so much better because there was something for everyone. We were ticking everybody's box. And then for me, it made a massive difference to my influencing skills. And that was huge. We had to, at Anti-Nolan, secure a lot of additional investment for the charity, made a massive difference about how I went around those conversations with the chief exec and the board in particular. And then individuals used those coaching sessions to make the transition. And our overall results, we tripled fundraising net income in 5 years, which wasn't all to do with Sean and Insights, but this played a massive role. But interestingly, what this did is we reduced staff turnover, increased retention, and also we increased internal promotion. So by the end of this program, 3 out of 5 of the heads of fundraising were internal promotions, people stepping up. And it was because we'd invested in them, which had enabled them to build their skills and capability. But it also meant me as the recruiting manager, I knew exactly where they were, what they were capable of, but also what support they then might need as we put them in to make that transition. And of course, that had a big knock-on effect because when you see fundraisers internally promoted to the senior roles, it makes people further down the rungs think, well, actually, it's worth staying here. There are genuine opportunities to move up. So it made a huge difference to us, and I'd really recommend anybody on the call today looking at engaging with Sean on this, because also interesting, which we're not talking about today, is we did actually also latterly use this in our relationships with major donors in particular, which is another story which we don't have time for today. But I'm very happy to take questions on how this works in practice if people want to post them in the chat stream.
Right, yeah, I was going to say we're coming to the end, guys. So if you want to we've got a couple more slides, and then if you want to start put questions down, if there's anything you want us to wrap up with at the end, and useful, someone's already mentioned how useful this is to use with major donors. So in terms of insight costs then, and Sean, now Sean, I have muted you, and for some reason I'm unable to unmute you, but I think you can unmute yourself. There we go. Yeah. If you want to just give us, I guess, a bit of an overview, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone who's interested, feel free to contact us and we can go into more detail. But the profiles cost for the foundation and management version are 150 per profile. It's normally recommended to have a 90-minute one-to-one feedback session to go through the profile. And if you then do a half-day or 2 half-day workshops to identify how to work best and how to drive fundraising growth, that's really effective, particularly if it's a new team or if it's a combination of a team. And then obviously, this often can be the beginning of individual leadership or performance coaching. So normally as a coach, I will ask the person to do a profile because it will tell me a lot about his or her preferences and how they interact with others and so on. And that can start from 200 per session or can be up to 300. And by the way, I do think that a great future workshop would be how you use insights with supporters and donors, because that's a great topic, because that's something that Catherine and I start focusing on towards the end. Okay. There's another slide I think is useful information. Next steps that you.
Yeah, so Catherine, you're also looking at doing some training, which is next Friday. Your first session at 12 noon. So you can give a little overview of what you're doing there, or we're doing.
Yeah. So this is looking at what it takes to be a great fundraiser at every level of your career. So what it means to be, how do you be a great manager? How do you be a great head? How do you move up to director? And particularly looking at how you might be able to make transitions. So if you've got people in your team who you want to be stepping up to line management for the first time, we'll look at how do you do that. If you're in a situation right now where you're thinking you may need to change income streams, so lots of community and special events fundraisers in particular thinking post restructures, God, I might need to actually make a career shift into a different part of fundraising, we'll look at how you can do that. And we'll also look at how you can take a step up internally, because again, often that process to step up internally can also be quite tricky. And sharing some general do's and don'ts about how you build your career in fundraising. And we're focusing a lot on attributes and attitudes as much as skills and experience. So this is the softer stuff that actually you need about when you're sat there as a fundraising director and you're looking at your team. I can always pick out the future stars of fundraising, even from like their first job or even at intern level. And it's about their attitude, actually. You can see it a mile off with the younger fundraisers who's really going to get to the top. So definitely do join us. It'll be a very useful session. But also, as I said, do have a look at the insight side, because I think at the moment, particularly during the level of change and almost like the new, actually smaller teams that are going to come out of this, this stuff is really powerful and can really help people.
Yeah. No, great. So yeah, get signed up for that. I'll pop your team on there. And then just in terms of, we've literally only got a couple of minutes, so actually maybe questions, if you've got anything, I'll send around a wrap-up email with Catherine and Sean CC'd, so that you can get in touch with them if there's something specific. Just to say a huge thank you to Sean for sharing all of those insights. That's really, really useful. Definitely a lot of stuff that we can all take away and reflect on our behaviour with our team leaders. And if you want to use any of the services, as I said, I'll CC you in. And yes, I hope you've enjoyed today. Thank you again, Catherine, for coming on, and looking forward to working with you again next week. If you've enjoyed today, please do post about it on LinkedIn, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll get updated videos of any other webinars that we've got coming up. Next webinar is back to Thursdays at 11, which is our standard slot, and that's on gender diversity as part of our ongoing commitment to diversity within the sector, which obviously we've touched on in here as well. And yeah, thanks so much for attending, everyone. I will send around the chat, the recording and the slides for you all to look at, and then look forward to seeing you in the future.
And thank you everybody for your nice comments on the chat stream. Thank you also to the cricket for its rather unintentionally starring role. Thank you everybody for helping to ignore. Oh, there we go. It's going to start up again at the end.
I think we had an owl. We had an owl at one point as well. I definitely had an owl in the background. So thanks for the
experience. But yeah, and also hang in there, guys. I know a number of you on the session today are either having to deliver restructures or are going through restructures or changing income streams. So do hang in there. We will get through this as a sector. And you will get through this in your career stage. That sounds like a trite thing to say, but we can get through this all together, and there's a lot of help and support out there. So do tap into it. Do feel like you can email any of the three of us with further questions. And also, you know, if it's possible budget-wise, have a look at working with Sean on this, have a look at coming on the training session, because we've got content that I think can really help you if you're in that set of circumstances. So hang in there, folks. We will come through it as a sector as ever.
Yeah, no, completely. And yes, I know a couple of you from the comments are already in touch with me. If you're, as Catherine said, if you're in a difficult situation, happy to give kind of career advice generally, or CV advice and things like that. So don't hesitate to get in touch. And equally, if you're recruiting, you know where I am. But thank you so much, everyone. We'll end now, and have a great day. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks, guys.